Tonight, sex trafficking closer to home than you think.
It's almost easier to order a human being than it is a piece of pizza at this point.
Plus, tanks to the rescue. New military equipment from Germany and the United States heading to Ukraine. And the CDC promotes LGBTQ inclusivity in schools, while critics cry foul.
That's just the very tiny tip of the iceberg.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Confronting the evil of human trafficking with more than 27 million victims, innocent lives held captive. Welcome to Faith Nation from our news bureau in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, a warning from the United Nations tonight. While new data might signal a decline in trafficking crimes, reality points to something very different. The UN's newly published global report in trafficking persons shows a drop in the number of victims for the first time in 20 years, attributing the fall largely to the pandemic. But the UN says it's not because there were actually fewer victims, rather because the global virus has pushed trafficking deeper underground. That makes it harder to identify victims and to target the criminals trafficking them. The UN also warning the war in Ukraine opens the door for those fleeing the violence to fall victim to traffickers. Well, it's not just a problem overseas. Here in the United States, about 20% of sex trafficking victims pass through the state of Texas. One small town sheriff's office has a strong message to those behind the crime: not in our backyard. Police are aggressively enforcing a state law that makes buying sex a felony. CBN's Tara Mergener rode along with Texas Sheriff's deputies to bring us this story. A word of warning: some of what you're about to see is disturbing.
Texas is the first state in the country to make buying sex a felony. It's a crime that can be easy to miss unless you know what you're looking for, with the victim often punished too. But not here in McLennan County, where a sheriff's office detective is changing the game.
Sex trafficking often conjures up images of big city crime committed quietly under the cover of darkness. But it's happening in small towns too.
It's almost easier to order a human being than it is a piece of pizza at this point.
Often in plain sight.
We keep the heat turned up and hammer down on them.
Put your hand up now, smoke your.
McLennan County sits between Dallas and Austin.
Is this a case where don't mess with Texas applies?
Don't mess with Texas, yes, especially Central Texas.
With a sheriff's office in Waco making sex for sale risky business.
We'll see very often where they're saying don't go to Waco because you run the risk of getting caught. So we're just going to one of the local motels. We got a text message from a guy who found the sex ad we had posted.
Since launching a human trafficking task force in 2014, Detective Joe Scaramucci's two-man team has been using internet savvy and a finely tuned ground game to round up hundreds of suspects.
We target traffickers, we target buyers.
Routinely outpacing larger law enforcement agencies.
Slide on out here for me, guy. Put the phone down.
I haven't seen one yet that's presented a reason why we're like, oh, yeah, we're not going to arrest you. What's your rank in the military?
Sergeant.
Hey, you even got love notes from your wife and your lunch kit.
Yeah. I can't do this. Please, I have to go home.
If we can take the buyers out, then we can also kind of decrease the amount of trafficking. Most of the time, law enforcement isn't doing that.
667.
10-4, en route to the jail.
Regular stings include Scaramucci posing online as a sex worker to lure buyers looking for a tryst.
So I'm telling him for a half hour to engage in full sexual intercourse is $140.
Even if you don't show up, chances are we're able to work it backwards and get an arrest warrant and go pick you up.
Hey, what's up, man? It's a felony.
It's a felony?
I have to tell you something.
What?
I just got arrested.
No, that is not what happened. Several sex buyers have been picked up right here just in the last few days. All are taken straight to jail. As of September 1, it's a felony.
Yeah. Yep, go right over here.
You know that paying for sex
No,
is
it is very
illegal.
illegal, yes.
Do you know it's a felony in Texas?
I did not know that.
What? When we get in there, I'll take them off.
Does it ever shock you how young some of these people are?
It's heartbreaking that 18-year-old, 19, and 20-year-old kids are showing up doing this kind of stuff.
Law enforcement is currently unjustly targeting women.
Scaramucci is the only officer who testified in support of Texas's new law cracking down on predators and shifting blame away from victims.
So this website aggregates sex ads just from all over the internet.
Ads selling the same woman across state lines, tattoos consistent with prostitution, and photos other than selfies are telltale signs. The majority of victims are female, lured into prostitution.
And then there's a girl that I've been watching for a while.
This one features an X-rated video with a man Scaramucci believes is her pimp. Quick detective work reveals the two are at a nearby motel.
When are y'all hop in with me real fast?
Should we change your locations?
Yeah, representative. We catch up with them at a gas station. His young family is along for the ride. The woman who says she's addicted to meth confirms he's been selling her since they met and keeping the money.
She was homeless. He found her at a local intersection walking down the street, picked her up, gave her a place to stay.
What is mega personals?
But like other women snared in Scaramucci's bus, she'll get help, not jail time.
This is gonna go as well.
Most of the women that we rescue don't want to be prostitutes. They get pushed into it or lured into it by the traffickers. These people are slick.
On standby are members of Unbound Now, which recently opened the state's second safe house for girls.
Help get the medical, food, shelter, just walk with them and then do case management.
When the unit shut down massage parlors in the county a few years ago,
another Waco massage parlor has been raided.
Not one sex worker faced charges.
They feed you drugs. You give them their money, they make sure you have your drugs, and nobody gets hurt.
Traffickers prey on people of all ages and backgrounds.
Befriending and then trying to figure out what.
Not only is McLennan's no-nonsense approach to the problem getting media recognition and prestigious awards, international law enforcement agencies are reaching out to learn from its success.
It's a cat and mouse game. You're trying to duck me, I'm trying to find you. And we got to get help for a victim of trafficking, right? So that's a huge success on our part.
Still, the work is daunting.
If you can get that one sexual deviant that is hitting up the 12-year-old girl, there's going to be 10, 20, 30 more behind them.
In Texas alone, tens of thousands of victims are minors, many peddled through the darkest corners of the internet.
Yeah, my name's Joe Scaramucci. I'm a detective with the Sheriff's Office in Waco, Texas.
This time, the trail leads to a retail employee in another state.
Well, the problem is I have your IP address. That's why I'm contacting you.
Especially troubling to law enforcement is the rising number of parents willing to sell their own children to predators.
It says 65 notifications.
When Scaramucci enters a chat room claiming to be a father of two, willing to make a deal, the phone lights up.
And these are from people wanting to have sex with kids?
These are for people wanting to engage in sex with kids or trade child pornography.
We're able to identify those children in many cases and get them help that they would have never had help with anyway.
Recovery from being trafficked is difficult. Their life has really been robbed from them through a lot of complex trauma.
Survival rates for any age are low, with an average life expectancy just 7 years. While keeping as many as possible from becoming a statistic, Scaramucci hopes this message will spread, not in my backyard.
Community members, get loud, right? Tell your police department or your sheriff's office, we know what's going on here. What are you doing to combat it?
An online sting operation.
A prostitution sting in Waco has landed 17 people in jail.
Clinton County Sheriff's Office arrested 15 men.
And they plan to keep those efforts going to eradicate human trafficking in the community.
And soliciting prostitution in Texas carries a maximum $10,000 fine and up to 2 years behind bars. A number of other states are also weighing strengthening their own laws now, John.
Excellent reporting, Tara, on a very important topic. A bit of a personal question for you. What was it like on the ground for you when you were there in Texas reporting? What stood out most?
Well, you know, there's so much to unpack here. What's not shocking about what we talked about? I think when you actually see it in broad daylight, a deal going down or people texting, looking to buy sex, especially from children in the middle of the day or, of course, anytime. This is going on all around us, unfortunately, and we never even know it unless you're law enforcement. You probably have no idea this was even a thing. The other thing that really shocked me as well is that the victims. So you saw that woman we caught up with. She was with her pimp. She had already turned 2 tricks that day. You would think that they'd be like, oh, thank God you're here, right? And they'd want to be saved. But there's so much emotional trauma. They're so dependent on that pimp or the abuser and so much manipulation. Some of them actually think they're in a romantic relationship. They're also dependent on them in most cases for their drugs. This woman was addicted to meth. So when the police show up, they have no idea how they're going to survive after that pimp is sent to jail. So it's astounding that they don't want to run away, but the mental trauma is just so great.
Just a few seconds left here, Tara. Some might see this as a victimless crime between 2 consenting adults, but that's not accurately depicting the scenario there. Tell us about that.
No, and Hollywood, I think, is partially to blame for that. You think about the images you've seen of prostitutes and pimps over the years, right? In some cases, it's kind of glamorized, but things you should know. The average person, the average woman, most of these are girls who get into this at age 15 years old. Their mind is manipulated. The abusers are manipulating them. They don't want to do this, but they're tricked into thinking they do. So how can a person who's on drugs, how can a person who is being manipulated actually consent to selling their bodies, John?
Again, excellent reporting, Tara. Thank you so much. And we'll be right back after the break. And welcome back. New movement in the war in Ukraine. The United States is set to send 31 Abrams tanks to the Ukrainian military as the Russian invasion nears the 11th month. Today's announcement from President Biden marks a reversal and comes as nations around the world ramp up aid to the war-torn country.
This morning, I had a long conversation with our NATO allies. We are fully, thoroughly, totally united. With spring approaching, Ukrainian forces are working to defend the territory they hold and preparing for additional counteroffensives. To liberate their land, they need to be able to counter Russia's evolving tactics and strategy on the battlefield in the very near term.
The president noted it will take months before the tanks arrive. In the meantime, the United States will work to train Ukrainian troops how to use them. Well, Sean Casey is the former representative for religion and global affairs at the State Department. He's also the author of the newly released book, Chasing the Devil at Foggy Bottom, The Future of Religion and U.S. Diplomacy. Sean, welcome. I think first off, let's talk about this title. Right before we came on set, you mentioned the devil is not a person.
That's correct. When I came up with this title, I had a number of friends say, well, who are you calling the devil? And actually, in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew word for the devil really means adversary. So I'm talking about the adversarial forces in the world that we were fighting against diplomatically during my tenure at the State Department.
Well, first off, as someone who spent years engaging on the front lines of foreign diplomacy on disputes both big and small, can you explain why you wrote this book?
Well, I thought it was an amazing story to have the opportunity in 2013 to join the State Department and inaugurate this Office of Religion and Global Affairs. Prior to that, the State Department had never had the capacity to assess religious dynamics around the world or to promote the engagement with religious actors. Secretary of State John Kerry felt like we had missed many opportunities around the world because we were either reticent or blind to those dynamics. So he asked me to come in and build this office to travel the world and try to teach our diplomatic apparatus how to do religion better.
As you just stated, you started the Religion and Global Affairs Unit at State. Can you describe the initial resistance? And once it got off the ground, can you talk about some of the successes that you made that perhaps wouldn't have happened without it?
So I think the reticence really comes from not being rewarded by the actual human resource policies of the State Department. American diplomats are smart, they're learned, they're multicultural, they've lived in multiple countries, they know many languages, they are able to go into countries and interpret what's going on there back to the United States, so our diplomacy will be more effective. So, frankly, we got a great welcome once we got inside the building, because a lot of diplomats said, we know religion's important in so many countries around the world, but we've never been given the tools to actually interpret the implications for American diplomacy, and now we've got somebody helping us do that in a more sophisticated way.
During the previous administration, we saw a milestone achievement with major religious implications for both Jews and Muslims. That's, of course, the historic Abraham Accords. I want to ask how this fits in with the subtitle of your book. How does this fit in with the future of religion in American diplomacy? Well,
we actually did a lot of work in Israel-Palestine. I made 4 trips there, and we engaged religious leaders across all 3 faiths in both spaces. So I remember meeting the Catholic Archbishop of Jerusalem, and he invited me in, and he shook my hand and he said, Dr. Casey, it's so great to have you. We've been waiting for you to arrive for 40 years. So there was an acknowledgement that American diplomacy has always looked at the politics, but we rarely talked to the actual religious communities there. So I met with Christians in Palestine, I met with Christians in Israel, I met with Muslims and Jews in both areas as well. And they wanted to be included in our diplomatic talks. And so I was really the first one to systematically reach out to all the religious groups across that vexed political spectrum. That kind of engagement's not really going on at the rate it was back in the Obama era, which I'm chagrined to admit.
Well, real quickly, in the few seconds that we have left, how do we carry on that work? I know that the office was closed down under the Trump administration. It has not been reinstated under the Biden administration.
Well, part of the purpose of writing the book was to say this is how we did it, and this is why it's important. So my hope is that at some point a Secretary of State, either the current one or a future one, will remember what Madeleine Albright called for decades ago and what Secretary of State John Kerry did, that this can help make American diplomacy stronger and more successful.
All right. Again, Sean Casey, author of Chasing the Devil at Foggy Bottom. Dr. Casey, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Promoting inclusivity or advancing a progressive agenda. How new CDC guidelines are stirring controversy in classrooms. When Faith Nation returns. Well, the Pope weighing in with new thoughts on homosexuality. Francis spoke out against countries that criminalize consensual same-sex activity, saying, quote, being homosexual isn't a crime. This follows previous statements that appear to reach out to LGBTQ people without changing the teaching of the Catholic Church. Nearly 70 nations criminalize same-sex acts. Pope Francis noted there's a difference between a crime and a sin, highlighting while being gay isn't criminal, that same-sex acts are sin. Though the Pope also added it's also a sin to lack charity to one another. Well, here at home, the Centers for Disease Control says new school inclusivity guidelines help address the academic and health needs of LGBTQ students. But critics disagree. As CBN's Charlene Aaron reports, some believe the agency is using the guidelines to promote a social agenda.
According to the CDC, its LGBTQ inclusivity in schools, a self-assessment tool, aims to help schools increase support for those students. One of the bigger questions surrounding this move is how does it contribute to the agency's mission of helping families, businesses, and communities fight disease and stay strong? The self-assessment document, which the CDC says is voluntary, is posted on the agency's website. It encourages educators to display rainbow flags in classrooms and unisex signs in bathrooms, and urges teachers incorporate LGBTQ content in their lessons, use of student-preferred pronouns, and attendance at LGBTQ trainings. Jay Richards serves as director of the DeVos Center for Life, Religion, and Family at the Heritage Foundation. He maintains this call falls outside the scope of the agency's role as a public health entity.
So we have the Center for Disease Control pushing materials which essentially denies the reality of sex and instead offers a replacement ideology called gender ideology. I don't think people necessarily realize how profound and radical that is.
Attorney Mary Rice Hassan with the Ethics and Public Policy Center fears the move could create an atmosphere harmful to staff and students who believe it violates their religious beliefs and conscience.
This really oversteps
the boundary of both what schools should be doing, but certainly what the government should be doing, forcing, in a sense, because of the implicit pressure, they say it's voluntary, but really they're putting coercion on anyone who has anything to do with the schools.
Something she warns could be a goal of organizations associated with the tool and promoting the LGBTQ movement.
It conditions kids to start questioning the most basic element about who they are, male or female. And then it includes in this assessment tool the encouragement to refer children outside the school to receive services that are going to support their self-defined sexuality or gender identity.
In a statement, the CDC responded that LGBTQ+ students experience severely higher levels of violence, bullying, and suicidal thoughts and behaviors than other students. CDC and partners developed this tool as an optional resource for school administrators and staff who are interested in better supporting LGBTQ+ youth. Please note these are not guidelines, and use is voluntary. Richards says the tool's ties to activist groups is especially troubling.
The links to activist groups like the Human Rights Campaign and some even more radical than that, I think, shows the real nature of what we're dealing with here. It's not as if this is hiding in plain sight. It's not hiding at all.
He encourages concerned parents to find out what's happening in their kids' schools and to speak up.
We might notice boys in girls' locker rooms or boys playing in girls' sports. That's just the very tiny tip of the iceberg of what is actually in store if we don't stop this thing.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. Keeping kids safe for decades. How one community is honoring a mainstay after this. Finally tonight, while school kids have come and gone over the years, for 41 of those years, one crossing guard has remained a mainstay. At 91, Louise Cobbs is hanging up her neon green vest, and her Long Island community is paying tribute to the local hero.
She's awesome because if something happens, she'll always be there.
Oh, thank you so much, honey.
Though she's retiring, Cobbs is not slowing down. She plans to volunteer her time at her church and at the local police department. 91 and still going. Congrats on her. Well, thanks so much for watching Faith Nation. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.